We're back with another CGC population count video. This time, it's 1986. Marvel and DC leading the way. Independent publishers, there are a lot of them. And there's the start of the artistic careers of a lot of the influential artists of the 80s and 90s. All those books up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hello, panelologists. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. And before we get started, please like, comment, subscribe. Check out the description of this video for links to my eBay store, my email, my whatnot, and my Instagram. So, we are going to be going through the CGC population count for the year 1986. And as we do, basically we go by blue label copies on the census. We count down the top 10 books. We look at the top 10 books for both DC and Marvel, as well as other keys, other expensive books, and the top book for all the other publishers, major publishers out there, and some not so major publishers. We have a very long list to get to today. It's like, I don't know, almost 2 full pages. The number of publishers out there is expanding, and the number of books from independent publishers is increasing in terms of there are some publishers that have more than one book on the list. But let's start with number 10 on the list. It's Marvel Comics, and it is X Factor number 5. This is the first cameo appearance of Apocalypse. X Factor, a highly printed run coming out of the X-Men title, basically reuniting the original X-Men. Bob Layton did the story. Jackson Geis and Joe Rubinstein did the art, and Ron Frenz and Joe Rubinstein did the cover. Apocalypse, we've seen him in the animated series. We've seen him in his own X-Men feature film. More about him later. This has a total number of 2,838 copies on the census. At number 9 on the list is Batman: The Dark Knight Returns, number 3 by Frank Miller, inks by Klaus Janson. This is The Death of the Joker. It was a 4-issue miniseries. This is issue number 3. Not going to say a whole lot more about it because we'll talk about this more later. This has a total of 3,020 copies on the census. At number 8 on the list is X Factor number 1. We alluded to it with issue number 5 being number 10 on the list. This, a huge seller at the time. This was kind of before the comic boom, with Spider-Man 1 and X-Men 1 and all those books, and X-Force 1. But this was a big seller for Marvel. The original X-Men coming back. Bob Layton did the story, and Walt Simonson did the cover. Jackson Geis, Layton, and Joe Rubinstein did the interior art. So this took the original X-Men, Cyclops, Jean Grey, Iceman, Beast, and Angel, and put them back in their own title. Right? The X-Men had been taken over by the new X-Men, and Cyclops had left. Beast had been with the Avengers for a while. They came back here. This title ran for a total of 149 issues. And after you get past the first couple of years, the keys are pretty thin until you get to I don't even know. That's not, there aren't a lot of keys in this run. And it was one of those books that was highly printed at the time. There are a lot of copies out there. So also there's not a scarcity of copies at all. This comes in with 3,103 copies on the census. The number 7 book on the list is Batman: The Dark Knight Returns number 2 by Frank Miller. Issue number 2 of the 4-issue limited series. Klaus Janson did the inks. Carrie Kelly becomes Robin. 3,129 copies on the census. Coming in at number 6 on the list is Uncanny X-Men number 211. This is the first full appearance of the Marauders. It's more of this John Romita Jr. cover and the fact that it's the 25th anniversary issue. All the Marvel comics in November of 1986, 25 years after Fantastic Four number 1 in November of 1961, had this 25th anniversary border, and it is very highly collected by collectors, especially 80s kids that grew up with this. The thing about this is, it's kind of, the X-Men is probably either X-Men or Amazing Spider-Man, probably X-Men at this point in time, was the best seller for Marvel. And so there are a lot of copies out there. But people like to get this slab. They like to collect these in 9/8. And so there are plenty of copies. Then there's an inverse relationship because people collect X-Men, right? And then there are the 25th anniversary collectors, and they have to get all of them. So basically the value is an inverse relationship to the print run. So a lot of the Star comics and stuff, and we'll touch upon that later, are more difficult to find and more expensive. This has 3,241 copies on the census. The number 5 book on the list is Batman The Dark Knight Returns number 4. Batman vs. Superman, Death of Alfred. This is probably the second most expensive book and the second most popularly submitted book of the run. Again, Frank Miller, inks by Klaus Janson, colors by Lynn Varley. Now, this was a prestige format book, so it's square bound. Harder to get in the highest grade because if you read it, it's no longer 9/8. It's going to crack the spine. There are 3,306 copies on the census. Coming in at number 4 on the list is Punisher Limited Series number 1. This is the first solo Punisher book. Steve Grant did the story. Mike Zeck did the cover, and with John Beatty did the interior art. This actually was planned to be a 4-issue limited series, as it says on the top of the cover, but it ended up running 5 issues. And then shortly thereafter, Punisher got his own ongoing series. Of course, Punisher premiering in Amazing Spider-Man 129, been a very popular character, adapted into numerous film properties, and most recently the Netflix series starring John Bernthal, which has led to his appearance in Daredevil Born Again and his upcoming appearance in Spider-Man Brand New Day, which is increasing the popularity of this book. So I think it has pushed the number of copies that have been probably sent in a little bit. This book comes in with a total of 4,657 copies on the census. At number 3 on our list is Batman The Dark Knight Returns number 1 by Frank Miller, Klaus Janson, and Lynn Varley. So this book, this mini-series, helped redefine comic books. And this is like kind of DC now taking the lead in terms of storytelling from Marvel and pushing more, I would say more mature stories in that, you know, they're not, there's a departure from the Bronze Age books and just more serious themes. Not, and there is more violence and such, but you know, there's no nudity or anything in these books, right? Well, not this one, but maybe another one. So this was a 4-issue miniseries. It was square-bound prestige format. So these books, when you read them, much like a paperback, you open it up and the spine gets creased. And there's no way to undo that because it's glossy cardstock cover, heavy cardstock cover. So the books that are in high grade are the books that were never read. For instance, that copy I got in a collection that had a 1, 2, 2s, 4 3s, and 4 4s that were never read. Kind of the guy was speculating on it. There was another issue number 1 that had a scratch on it, and issue number 2 that had a little blemish. They didn't come back 9/8. But, you know, if they're not read because the cover is tougher cardstock, it's not that difficult to get in 9/8 because they do hold up fairly well. But anyway, so the storyline is that it takes place in the future. Batman is kind of retired. Gotham City is this post-apocalyptic thing. And Miller kind of uses these storytelling techniques where he brings the media into it. And, you know, this was a widely popular series at the time and has remained so. And it has really helped redefine Batman. Because Batman was redefined in the early 1970s by Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. And at that point in time, in the early 1970s, the classic rogues gallery of villains, Joker, Penguin, Catwoman, Riddler, were set aside in favor of new characters that kind of fit more into a more mature element, like Ra's al Ghul and Man-Bat. And then as the 70s went along and you got further away from the Adam West TV series of 1966, those tropes reemerged. Batman, you know, became more of a standard superhero, not as silly as it was in the 60s, but this kind of set that dark tone that Tim Burton used, that Christopher Nolan used, that Zack Snyder has used. And storytelling as Batman. This is a change in that storytelling. So it's a hugely important book in comic book history. This particular issue has a total of 4,937 copies on the census. Now, I will say a lot of these books, because the creators are still more or less available, for most of them, are very popular signature series books. But I only talk about Blue Labels just to keep it simple. Let's go to number 2 on the list. And number 2 on the list is Watchmen #1 by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. This was a 12-issue limited series that also redefined comic books. This was more mature, and it was more mature. There were sexual themes and nudity more so than the Dark Knight book. This also changed comic books. Alan Moore's deconstruction, he had done it previously with Miracle Man and Swamp Thing, his deconstruction of the superhero comic book, of the superhero tropes, and adding more, like a different kind of reality to them. Again, it's changed comic book storytelling. So in 1982, I believe it was, DC acquired the characters that were published by Charlton. Charlton was, their editor-in-chief at the time was Dick Giordano, who was later the inker on Neil Adams' work on Green Lantern, and then became an editor at DC and an executive. He helped bring those characters over. And DC used them in Crisis on Infinite Earth. So Moore saw these new characters to use. And remember, the Charlton characters had fairly short runs in the 1960s. The run of Charlton superheroes was about a year long. But he wanted to take those characters and then create this story on this other Earth, this dystopian future, like where Nixon is still president and the very fascist leanings. But DC's like, we want to use those characters in ongoing comics. You know, we want their own series. And sure enough, the Question and Blue Beetle and Captain Atom all got their ongoing series. So Moore just tweaked the characters slightly, and there's no mistaking who is who. So Blue Beetle became Night Owl. Captain Atom became Dr. Manhattan. Nightshade became Silk Spectre. Peacemaker became the Comedian. Peter Cannon Thunderbolt became Ozymandias. And Peter Cannon Thunderbolt, his DC no longer has the rights to him. We talked about that way back in the 1960s. And the Question became Rorschach. And so, but then Moore created this completely different story. Now, it wasn't really part of DC continuity until several years ago when DC kind of reintroduced it. They do own the rights to it. This has been published over and over again. Now, the story was supposedly Moore was able to reacquire the rights to the characters when DC was no longer publishing, but they just have kept publishing this as a graphic novel for 40 years. It led to 2 movies, a movie, a live action movie, a television series, which was kind of a follow-up to this, a 2-part animated adaptation. So, and here's my question. And you can answer this in the comments below. What do you think? Do you think James Gunn will use these characters at some point in the DCU? Maybe like 10 years down the road, when everything comes to a head and we're talking about DC's 100th anniversary, possibly. They could take the characters, either they'll be kind of old by the time from the movie, but we'll see. This particular book has a total of 4,980 copies in the census. The number 1 book on the list is X Factor #6, the first full appearance and cover appearance of Apocalypse. Big antagonist in the animated series. Louise Simonson did the story, Jackson Geis and Bob McLeod did the art, and Ron Frenz and Joe Rubinstein did the cover. We talked about X Factor already, so this was one of those new villains. Oscar Isaac played him in a movie, and he was a main part of that, 90s X-Men animated series. And the X-Men 97, the reboot. So one of the more popular villains of the time that came out of the X-Men title this late. Now, this is very interesting. The census count on this book, or the population count, Blue Label copies, 8,204. That is the lowest total for a book in first place since 1973, 13 years. So this is not one of the big keys of the 1980s, not one of the highly collected ones. And, it outdistances Watchmen #1 by a considerable margin. So that's our top 10. We have a long way to go. We have a lot of DC. I think it was 5 DC and 5 Marvel. So our 6th Marvel comic is Uncanny X-Men 212. This is a Wolverine versus Sabretooth book, and it's really sold by this cover by Barry Windsor Smith. Black cover, harder to get in a 9/8. And, people really like these classic Wolverine Sabretooth battles, and this is when it started. Sabretooth was introduced as a villain in Iron Fist, and his subsequent appearances early on were in Power Man and Iron Fist. So this is one of the keys, along with, now 211, 212, 213 is also a big key, but I think that would be 1987 because this is the December issue. This has 2,758 copies on the census. Next, our 7th book from Marvel is Masters of the Universe #1, story by Mike Carlin, art by Ron Wilson and Dennis Janke. So, the Masters of the Universe had already had a miniseries over at DC after their first appearance in DC Comics Presents 47. Marvel acquired the rights and put them in Star Comics. So Star Comics were an imprint of Marvel that had comics aimed at kids. And we'll talk about one or two others later in this episode. This particular title, based on the TV series, which was based on the toy, and we'll come back to that later on, which we've talked about over the last several years. There is going to be a new movie coming out next year. It ran for just 13 issues. But again, Masters of the Universe, because the animated series and the toys, is really a big part of the nostalgia for 80s kids. And so these books are highly collectible. There's even a Marvel Age in which He-Man appears, which, people like to pull that into complete it. So you need DC Comics Presents 47, the miniseries from DC, that Marvel Age in this book. And then, of course, there have been subsequent books from other publishers all the way along. The rights are, I believe they're still owned by Mattel. This particular issue has 2,734 copies on the census. The 8th Marvel book on the list is New Mutants Annual #2. This is the first appearance in U.S. Comics of Psylocke, Elizabeth Braddock, who is the sister of Captain Britain. Chris Claremont did the story. Alan Davis did the cover and the interior art. So New Mutants at the time was Bill Sienkiewicz was doing the art, but Alan Davis got the assignment for this annual, and it introduced in U.S. Comics a character who's become very popular in the X-Men universe. This has 2,661 copies on the census. Let's stay with Marvel Annuals for our next book. It's the 8th Marvel book on the list, and it is Captain America Annual #8, Mike Zeck classic cover with Wolverine and Cap. That's why people collect this book. There's no other key significance, but it is a really awesome cover. There are 2,547 copies on the census. The 6th DC book on the list is Booster Gold #1, the first appearance of Booster Gold, as well as Skeets and Blackguard. Blackguard portrayed by Pete Davidson in the Suicide Squad movie, and Booster Gold is, James Gunn announced that's going to be a property that they're going to develop in the DCU. We haven't heard much about it since that announcement, what was that, 2.5 years ago? Dan Jurgens, popcorn. There we go. Dan Jurgens did the story and the cover, and Mike DiCarlo inked him in the interior. So this title ran for its 25 issues. He did have a second volume. He's come back. So Booster Gold was a football player in the future, I think the 25th century. And he was shaving points. He was throwing games, got in trouble with the future mob, and then broke into, was it the Flash Museum? Anyway, broke into a museum, stole some time travel stuff and some other weapons, and then came to the 20th century and kind of tried to pass himself off as a superhero and market himself to make money. It was kind of a comedic character, had a big turn in the J.M. DeMatteis, Keith Giffen, Kevin Maguire run on Justice League, which followed this a couple of years later, and really was paired with Booster Gold for a lot of with Blue Beetle for a lot of that, and we'll see how they play him in the DCU. He has maintained kind of B or C list in DC Comics, has had a couple series over the years. This has 2,431 copies on the census. The 10th Marvel book on the list is Uncanny X-Men number 201. This is the first appearance of Cable as a baby. But we don't know it's Cable yet because we haven't gotten the first appearance of Cable. It's the first appearance of Nathan Summers. Chris Claremont did the story, Rick Leonardi and Will Portasio did the cover and the art. You do have to be careful of this book because there was a reprint of this that was with a toy, I believe. It was saying not for sale on it. That's not worth as much as the original issue. The original isn't a very expensive issue. It can be in a 9/8 because of that black border. There are 2,184 copies on the census. The next book is another Marvel book. This is Star Wars 107. It's the last issue in the run. So it is harder to find. Mary Jo Duffy did the story, and Cynthia Martin and Joe Rubenstein did the cover. If I was one of the actors, even if I was Chewbacca, I don't think I'd be flattered by the depiction on this cover. But last issues are harder to find. People like to collect this entire Star Wars run. People like to collect last issues as well. So this is one of the more expensive books of the year, especially in high grade. There are 2,089 copies on the census. Our next book, we finally go to an indie, and it's from Mirage Studios. The top book there is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 7. This is the first full color one. And Richard Corbin contributed art on this particular issue. There are 1,134 copies on the census. Closely following it is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 8, which has an appearance by Cerebus. And art by Dave Sim and Gerhard. Gerhard, who did the backgrounds on Cerebus the Aardvark, also worked on this. This has 1,040 copies on the census. Let's go back to DC for their 7th book. It is Watchmen number 2 by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. Just the second issue in the miniseries, 1,020 copies on the census. Going back to Mirage, this is Donatello Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle number 1. This is a one-shot, which includes a pinup by Stan Sakai, but it's Eastman and Laird all the way. Each of the Turtles did get a one-shot. So Raphael got the first one, right? I'm not sure when Michelangelo got it, or Michelangelo got his. Anyway, a one-issue micro-series. 968 copies on the census. The 8th DC book on the list is Green Lantern number 201. It says on the core Green Lantern Corps. They changed the title from Green Lantern to Green Lantern Corps to focus on a larger selection of Green Lanterns. And this is the first appearance of Kilowog, that big guy we see there holding the trade dress. He did appear in the Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern film, voiced by Michael Clark Duncan. It remains to be seen if we'll see Kilowog appear in the DCU. It seems like the first Lantern series we might not get a lot of the core, but who knows? We already have Guy Gardner. We know we're getting Hal Jordan and John Stewart. So when do we go cosmic with that? Steve Englehart did the story. Joe Staton did the art and the cover. There are 910 copies on the census. Back to Mirage. It is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 6. 905 copies on the census. Back to DC. Their 9th book was Watchmen number 3. 856 copies on the census. And the 10th DC book on the list is Watchmen number 4. This has the origin of Dr. Manhattan. We see that alluded to in the in two ways in the on the cover here. The picture of him before he gains his superpowers back in the 1950s or 60s. I forgot the exact year. And then the footprints in the sand on the moon afterwards. Or is it Mars? Oh, man, I have to reread Watchmen. This, and it's the only 4 issues came out in 1986. All 4 of them were in the top 10 for DC. This is the December issue. 819 copies on the census. So now we got to cover a whole bunch of other publishers. So buckle up. But before we do that, we're back to Mirage. This is Leonardo, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle #1 by Eastman and Laird. And this has a total of... Where is my Leonardo book? I have to find my notes. Leonardo #1 is 792 copies on the census. Our next book is from Eclipse. Their top book is Airboy #5, cover by Dave Stevens of Valkyrie. It's a good girl cover by. Airboy was a series. Now, it was an interesting series. It's only 50 cents. It's bi-weekly. So instead of 32 pages, it's 16 pages. It is a smaller book. It was based on the Hillman Comics aviator character from the 1940s, including his supporting cast, Valkyrie and Skywolf, the Heap. And Airboy ran for, I believe it was 50 issues. Chuck Dixon did the story. Stan Woke and Willie Blyberg did the art. And this is a cover homage to Air Fighters Comics Volume 2, Number 2. The Hillman Comics, which was predominantly Airboy and Air Fighters, they did a volume and issue number. So, like, basically the issue numbers go Volume 1, 1 through 12, Volume 2, 1 through 12, Volume 3, 1 through 12. But not so with the Eclipse book. This has 782 copies on the census. The top book from Epic, which was an imprint of Marvel Comics, is Elektra Assassin #1. Interesting pairing here. And this book, I'm surprised, isn't more sought out by collectors. It's a Frank Miller story with Bill Sienkiewicz art. It's an 8-issue limited series, so it's a little more mature in tone. Bill Sienkiewicz was very experimental on this book. He had gone from kind of a Neil Adams influenced artist when he did Moon Knight to much more experimental when he was doing New Mutants to much more avant-garde when he did Elektra Assassin. Popular character, popular writer, popular artist, 550 copies on the census. The top book from Comico is Johnny Quest #5. This also is a Dave Stevens cover. And we had talked about previously, this is the Dave Stevens was an artist who worked predominantly for the independent publishers of the 1980s. This Johnny Quest run ran for 31 issues from Comico. And I do use the pronunciation Comico because that was the pronunciation the people who worked at the company used when they were interviewed in the documentary Dave Stevens Drawn to Perfection, which really opened up the eyes of a lot more collectors to Dave Stevens' work, and about 2 years ago really pushed the popularity of his books. A lot more got graded. They were worth more people seeking it out. This Johnny Quest ran for 31 issues. It was based on a Hanna-Barbera animated series from the 1960s. And the Dynamite has just done a new series with Johnny Quest. Basically, this kid, his father's a scientist who works for the government. He has Race Bannon as his bodyguard, and they kind of adopted this Indian kid, Haji. So, yeah, just a beautiful Dave Stevens cover. He also did the cover to, was it issue number 3, but there are no ladies on the cover, so it's not nearly as popular. 490 copies on the census. A new independent publisher, and an important one. Dark Horse Presents #1. This is the first appearance of Black Cross, who we see on the cover. It's also the first appearance of Concrete by Paul Chadwick, and this is the first Dark Horse title. This anthology, which was black and white interiors, ran for 157 issues, has the first appearance of Aliens vs. Predator, has the first appearance of The Mask, some other desirable issues. But I'm going to talk about Concrete by Paul Chadwick. This was one of the more popular, more well-received independent books of the 1980s. He did have some issues here. He had a whole bunch of short miniseries, all done by Paul Chadwick. So basically, there's this guy, and he ends up with his brain being implanted into this body of like this huge rock monster, or rock being. He's not really a monster because he's a good guy. And they kind of turn it inward. It could have certainly been he's kind of like the Thing. Could have been a superhero action title, but instead it was an examination of the human condition. and a lot of introspection in the book. Excuse me, I try to get comfortable. So I love the Concrete series. I try to collect every appearance of Concrete. There have been talks over the years of movies that have been optioned, but nothing has ever come of it. I think it would be a great property to see on either the big screen or small screen. I would definitely get my tickets to that. This Dark Horse #1 has a total of 360 copies in the census. From Fantagraphics is Usagi Yojimbo Summer Special #1 by Stan Sakai. We've talked in previous episodes about Usagi Yojimbo and his first appearance in Albedo #2. Stan Sakai has shepherded this character over the last 40 years. This book has 283 copies on the census. The top book from Megaton is Megaton #3. It has a dragon appearance, which is kind of a precursor to the Savage Dragon, with art by Eric Larson. This is before Larson went to work for Marvel. So these books are harder to find, but there's still enough of them to be this high on the census count, and they're sought after by collectors who are fans of Larson and fans of Savage Dragon. He's still publishing Savage Dragon to this day. We'll talk about that when we get into 90s indies. 236 copies on the census. The next book on the lid is another Eclipse book that I included because of the Good Girl art by Dave Stevens. Wally Wood, the classic artist from the EC, Tower Comics in the 60s, his work on Daredevil and Submariner, but he did like his more adult-themed stuff. And then Dave Stevens did this cover, which the popularity was enhanced by the documentary. There are 234 copies on the census. The next book this is an interesting one. This is from Metropolis Comics. It is Turtle Mania Special #1. So this was a book that there are a couple of different renderings of it. Eastman and Laird did the cover and the art. It also includes Cerebus and the Flaming Carrot. Harder to find, sought out by Turtle collectors. 228 copies on the census. From Arrow Comics is Dead World #1, which has a Stuart Kerr story and a Vincent Locke cover. Mature horror. This title ran for 9 issues. There are 202 copies on the census. From Fantaco Enterprises is Gore Shriek #1. This is the first published artwork by Greg Capullo, who later went on to do a lot of issues of Spawn. He's done Batman over the years, and we talked about it at the intro of this video. We're going to see some popular creators beginning their careers here in 1986 and making the books, especially because when they worked on independent books, they're harder to find, making their work a little more popular. This Gore Shriek did run for 6 issues. Fantaco was based in Albany, New York. They lasted for a few years. And this particular book has 175 copies in the census. The next book is from Solson Publications, and it is Solson Christmas Special #1, featuring Samurai Santa, and is the first published artwork by Jim Lee. And again, a tough book to get in grade because of this black cover, a tougher book to find. These indie books, they weren't nearly as popular, obviously, as Marvel and DC, or even at by this time, the Turtles. And so, again, Jim Lee, a very popular artist, and Jim Lee fans seek this out. There are 164 copies in the census. The top book from Silver Wolf is Grips #1, a Chris Silver story. Tim Vigil did the cover and art. 146 copies on the census. Top book from Kitchen Sink is Death Rattle, Volume 2, #8. Covered by Mark Schultz. It's the first appearance of Mark Schultz's Xenozoic Tales. It has been made for mature readers, but it's not quite as mature as some of the other Kitchen Sink stuff that had come out starting in the 70s. They were expanding their portfolio of titles 113 copies on the census. The next book is from Marvel, and this is a very expensive book. It is Care Bears number 7. Howie Post did the story, and with Roberta Edelman did the art. Who cares about Care Bears? Nobody, except for this anniversary cover. There are Care Bears fans, so there are people that collect the Star Comics run. But this is the book that is I think this is the most expensive 25th anniversary cover. The Muppet Babies is tough, and a few of the other Star comics are the most difficult to get. And so in universal grade, there are just 111 copies in the census. Compare that to the X-Men book, right? Which on the census has how many copies? 3,200. So there are like 30 times as many copies of X-Men as there are Care Bears. So this is one of, if you're going to be a completionist, this is going to be one of the more difficult ones to track down. 111 copies on the census again. Up next, the top book from First Comics is Grimjack number 26 by John Ostrander, Tom Sutton, and Paul Guinan. Sutton did the cover. This has a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles backup by Eastman and Laird, and we can see that it is above the trade dress Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in Munden's Bar. Munden's Bar was this kind of area in a pocket dimension. I'm not sure exactly the terminology they used at the time to explain it, but characters from other realities like the Turtles could come in, and Turtle stuff people want. 86 copies on the census. Top book from Thoughts and Images is Albedo, the Prototype, issue number 0, the 4th print. Steve Galacci did the story, cover, and art. We had talked about this from the first and second print a couple of years ago. This is the 4th print. 49 copies on the census. The top book from Aerosol Comics is The Adventurers number 1. Scott Benke, Peter Shue. Aerosol was a Canadian comic book publisher which published comics from 1985 to 1988 before they merged with Eternity Comics. More about Eternity Comics later. This has a total of 46 copies on the census. The top book from Last Gasp is Cherry number 3 by Larry Waltz. After issue number 2, they changed the title from Cherry Pop-Tart to just Cherry. This is for adults only. It is pornographic in an Archie style, which appeals to some people, kind of creepily. She is 18. They do point that out. As long as it's great, it's good. Okay, I just have to look at the cover to make sure there's nothing totally objectionable in it. This one, signed by Larry Waltz, the creator. There are, in terms of blue labels, there are 41 copies on the census. The top book from Gladstone is Donald Duck number 246. So Gladstone took over the publication from what had been Western, Gold Key, and they published the Disney titles, into the 90s. Surprisingly, this does have 39 copies on the census. I do believe it is Carl Barks cover. That ties it with the top book from Slave Labor, which is Samurai Penguin number 1. 8 copies on the census. The top book from Quality Comics is Judge Dredd Volume 2 number 1. Now this ran for 61 issues. Quality kind of gave way to Fleetway, I think it was. Basically, after the Eagle run, which ran for 27 issues, the IP moved over here to Quality Comics. John Wagner and Alan Grant did the story. Steve Dillon did the cover and art. We talked about Judge Dredd previously. 2 movies, Stallone and Carl Urban. There are 33 copies in the census. That ties it with the top book from Harrier Comics, which is Red Fox number 1. Fox did the story, cover, and art. This was a British title. Harrier Comics published comics from 1984 through 1989. And here we have Red Fox, who was kind of like a Red Sonja, Conan the Barbarian type character. There were 33 copies on the census. The top book from Lodestone Publications is Honeymooners number 1, based on the classic 1950s television series, photo cover of Jackie Gleason and Audrey Meadows. So Lodestone published comics 85 to 86, and then they became connected to Deluxe Comics, which has been publishing the Thunder Agents book. So the Honeymooners in the 1950s started off as a sketch on the Jackie Gleason show. Jackie Gleason played the main character, Ralph Cramden. And if you're my age and you grew up in the New York metropolitan area, the Honeymooners repeats were a staple on WPIX in reruns, either in the early evening or like at 11:30 at night. I miss those days. That and The Odd Couple, and later on you got Seinfeld. It was always like kind of New York-based stuff that they focused on. They did have their own series for 39 episodes, the classic 39 episodes. Then there were lost episodes. They went back after those 39 episodes over the course of the 1955 and 56 seasons, back to other numbers in Jackie Gleason. They did musical numbers. There was a reboot in color episodes in the 60s. Art Carney, who played the second in command, the buddy to Ralph Cramden, won 5 Emmys. Carney later won an Academy Award for Harry and Tonto. And Comic Book Connection, he played the Archer on Season 2, Episode 1 and 2 of the Batman TV series. Audrey Meadows here, who played Alice Cramden, did win an Emmy as well. Carney, of course, only 1 for the Honeymooners, the other 4 for the Jackie Gleason show. And this book, one shot. There was another publisher did pick up the miniseries, and this has 30 copies on the census. The top book from this would be ICG is the official Crisis on Infinite Earths Index. Basically, it was a resource guide that listed all of the characters that appeared in Crisis on Infinite Earths and their backgrounds and their first appearances and stuff. I do believe this is a Perez Ordway cover, and there are 28 copies in the census. The top book from Fish Wrap Productions is Fish Police #1, the second printing by Steve Moncuse. We talked about this in the previous episode for 1985. 25 copies on the census. The top book from Antarctic Press is Ninja High School #1. This inspiration from Japanese manga and anime, but was distinctly created in North America. I think it might have been Canadian. Ben Dunn did the story, cover, and art. Pretty pricey book to find. There are 23 copies in the census, and there are more than 23 people that want copies. The next book is from Ripoff Press. This is The Complete Cheech Wizard Volume 2, #1 by Vaughn Bode. This harkens back to the underground comics of the 60s and 70s and Bode's development of the character Cheech Wizard. There are 22 copies in the census. The next book is the top book from EC Comics, and that is Mad, #266. The hot TV issue. There are 19 copies on the census, which ties it with the top book from New England Comics, which is the New England Comics newsletter, #14. Why is this important? This New England Comics was a series of comic shops in New England. And you see down here, Quincy, Boston, Brockington, and Norwood. New England's best comic shops. Their mascot was created by Ben Edlund, the Tick. And you see him down in the left-hand side there in the corner box. This was his first appearance. He later got his own comic book, had a TV show in 2001 starring Patrick Warburton that ran for 9 episodes. There was a cartoon Disney series in 2016. Amazon did a series. So the Tick has been a very popular property for a long time. This is magazine-sized. Again, hard to find. There are enough Tick collectors out there. There are 19 copies on the census, and I bet there are more than 19 people that want a copy. There are, so that's going to move us to our next book, which is the top book from Now Comics. This is a new publisher that had a lot of TV movie adaptations. Now, I am going to put a disclaimer on here. I'm a little confused. This is, the book in question is Real Ghostbusters Spectacular 3D Special. No number. from Now Comics. The date on here says 1086. It was based on an animated series, which was based on the 1984 movie starring Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, etc. And there was an animated series that ran from 1986 to 1991 for 140 episodes in animation. Now Comics, started by Tony C. Caputo in 1985, had a lot of TV and movie properties. It ran through 1984, was rebooted again in 2003 through 2006, but its real heyday was this decade. But now, when I look at other references, this particular issue is listed as 1991. So I'm not totally familiar with the book. So if you have more information than me, just drop it in the chat. Now, the movie was Ghostbusters, the classic song and everything. The cartoon series was the real Ghostbusters because Filmation had the rights to a Ghostbusters TV series. There was a live-action TV series in the 1970s that played on Saturday mornings, starring Forrest Tucker and Larry Storch, who had teamed together previously in the 1960s in the sitcom F Troop. So they couldn't use the name Ghostbusters. They figured, okay, let's just call it the real Ghostbusters. And that's where we stood. This book has 17 copies on the census. The top book from Steel Dragon Press is Omaha, the Cat Dancer, number 2. Kate Worley did the story. Reed Waller did the cover and art. It's for adults only. It's basically the story of a exotic dancing cat. Very adult. 16 copies on the census, which ties it with the top book from Blackthorn Publications. We've mostly done 3D books of other properties. But this is Preteen, Dirty Jean, Kung Fu Kangaroos, number 1 by Lee Mars. There were a lot of these, and we'll see at least one more on this list. A lot of these titles that were takeoffs on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, except they seemed to get longer and longer as time went by. 16 copies on the census. Our next book is the top book from Eternity, I believe. Yes. This is X-Mutants number 1. David Lawrence and Anthony Pereira did the story. Ron Lim and Mike Witherby did the cover and art. There are 15 copies on the census, which ties it with the top book from Eagle, which is Judge Dredd number 27. This is before it went over to Quality. The title ran 6 more issues. This is the January issue, so by July, it was done with Eagle and moved over to Quality. 15 copies on the census. Our next book, we're going to keep going. Now we're down to really a lot of smaller publishers. The next book that we have is, here we go, from Planet X Productions is Geriatric, Gangrene, Jiu-Jitsu, Gerbils. Are we seeing a pattern here at all? Tony Paslicato did the story cover and art. There are 14 copies on the census, which ties it with the top book from Fun Inc. Art, which is Rappin' Max Robot number 1. Ernie Orr did the cover and the art and the story. This is the first hip-hop comic. This also, it's black and white. It's thinner. It's harder to find. I believe there were only 500 copies printed. I did find a copy of this in a collection once, and I had a collector. I was selling at King Con. It was funny. I did the preview show with 3 Men in a Basement, and I showed off this book. So there's somebody that wanted it. We worked out a very advantageous trade for us. And also, Evan with Goodbye Comics had a poster of Rappin' Max Robot. But this book also has additional significance in that the back cover is by Keith Haring, who is a very famous artist, a street artist of the time, but located in, I believe, Greenwich Village in New York City. There are, for Rappin' Max Robot, 14 copies on the census. The next book is Rip in Time number 1 from Fantagore by Bruce Jones and Richard Corbin. There are also 14 copies on the census. The top book from Milky Way Graphics Publications is One Shot Parody Issue number 1, which is obviously a parody of the X-Men, but here it's pronounced Jmen. One syllable. 13 copies on the census. The top book from Comics Unlimited is Daffy Kadaffy, no number. Malice in Wonderland. Basically, I guess, a Daffy Duck-looking character teams up with the Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. I have no idea what this book's about otherwise. The only thing I know is there are 12 copies in the census. Now, they didn't always imitate just Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Excalibur Publications, their top book is G.I. Jackrabbits number 1. A Real American Hare. 12 copies in the census, which ties it with the top book from Mature Magic Publications. This is John Tar number 1, Bill W. Miller cover, Tony Lorenz cover and art. Also 12 copies of the census. The top book from Crystal Publications is Eagle number 1. 11 copies of the census. Our next book is the top book from Aardvark Vanaheim. There's actually a two-way tie. Cerebus the Aardvark number 88 and Cerebus the Aardvark number 89. Both have 9 copies on the census. The next book, and this is an interesting one. This is an expensive one. This is Turtle Mania Special number 1 by Metropolis Comics. The Gold Edition. Eastman and Laird cover and art. And this is a qualified grade for now. I don't know if this book has been resubmitted. And it says the notes are 3 names, sketch, and 10/10 or 10 out of 10 written on back cover in pen and marker. So I'm not sure who the 3 names are. Eastman, Laird, and somebody else. But this is a perfect example. And I don't know, there are only 10 of them maybe that exist, at least with the autographs. There are 8 qualified in one signature series. But if you have a copy of this, and it is an expensive book, you can crack it out, submit it, and you should be able to get a yellow label with the JSA authenticated signatures. Now, I don't know how they do that. And I was informed after the fact, talking about Turtles, Gobbledygook, numbers 1 and 2, it will say on the label that it was verified by Kevin Eastman, and that's the only way that CGC will slab a book, is if Kevin Eastman verifies that it's one of the original handful of copies that's out there, because it's a very easy book to counterfeit. But anyway, the Turtle Mania Gold, there are 8 copies on the census, qualified, and 1 signature series. That could turn around. The top book from Harvey Comics is Richie Rich number 219. This is a return of Harvey Comics after a couple of years. They had stopped publishing their myriad of titles as a special collector's issue because Richie Rich returns. You asked for him. Not me. I didn't. 8 copies on the census. The top book from Archie is Archie Giant Series Magazine number 565, which takes place in the exposition, the World Exposition of 1986, which was held in, where was it, Vancouver? In Vancouver. Yeah, it says it down there on the bottom right hand of the cover. Maybe that's what makes this more popular. There are 8 copies on the census. Our next book is from HM Communications. It's Heavy Metal Volume 10, number 2, also issue 107. There are 7 copies on the census. I'm going to talk about, only because this is a really strange one. Up next is another Archie book. It's Betty's Diary number 1. Now, it is an Archie number 1. But one of the very weird things, like when I start doing research, every once in a while, I'll find something that really makes no sense to me. And that is that I'm trying to find the right number. Betty's Diary 1. Okay. I don't see it verified. It's not on Go Collect. But if I go to GPA, Betty's Diary number 1. According to GP Analysis, there was a sale of this book in a 9.2. Yes. In November of 1922. Height of the comic boom, granted, but still a bananas. This was a heritage auction, I believe. Yeah, that's where, on Heritage, somehow it sold for $932.40. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me how. And it's totally incongruous to any other sale of this book ever. I don't see any reason for it other than it being an Archie number 1. It has no key significance. The estimate, right, that Heritage Auction assigned to it, at the time of sale, it said Overstreet 2022 near mint minus 9.2 value is $7. And on the census, there's one in 9.2 and one higher. How much is that higher grade worth? Probably nowhere near $900. One of the crazier sales I've ever seen, and it's a Heritage Auction, so it's not, it's verifiable. I mean, bananas, 6 copies on the census. Up next, let me get back to my list, is the top book from Warp Graphics, which is Warp Graphics Annual number 1, which includes, in addition to an ElfQuest story, there's A Distant Soil, Panda Con, Thunder Bunny, and others. 6 copies in the census. From Continuity Comics, Neil Adams' company, Toy Boy number 1, covered by Neil Adams. I don't know, this kid has toys and he's able to make this big robot do things. 5 copies in the census, which ties it with the top book from Vortex Comics, Yummy Fur number 1. No idea. 5 copies in the census. The top book from Harvey Picar is his annual entry. It's American Splendor number 11. 4 copies in the census. The top book from Charlton. There's a tie. It's Dr. Graves number 75, which, say goodbye to Charlton. This is the last Charlton book. Last year, Charlton. This is Dr. Graves number 75, last issue in the series. That ties it with, it's tied with Professor Coffin, number 21, last issue in the series, both of them with 4 copies on the census. Return of Harvey Comics. Actually, this should bump up a little bit higher. Let's edit. The top book from Deluxe Comics is Wally Wood's Thunder Agents number 4. This is the penultimate title in the series. There are 3 copies in the census. The top book from Mattel is Masters of the Universe, The Ultimate Battleground. These are books that came with the toys, and they were using them initially before the comics came out to kind of put the backstory out there for the toys. There are 2 copies on the census. And the top book from Raw Books is the final installment, Chapter 7 of Mouse, A Survivor's Tale. We've talked about this plenty of times in the past. This is the book that by Art Spiegelman, which has become a very important graphic novel over the years. 1 copy in the census. That also is going to tie it. There's a 3-way tie top from Victory Publications. We got Phase 1, number 1, Shuriken number 3, and Shuriken number 4, each with 1 copy in the census. And that's going to wrap it up for 1986. So a down year at the top, an up year for the number of publishers that are coming out. There's all these independent publishers. We have kind of the mainstays of the 80s. You got the First and the Now and the Eclipse. You have Dark Horse, which is still around, coming out. with their first book. So I think all in all, a pretty exciting year. There's a lot of fun stuff, but we're right in the midst of the 80s in DC. For me, DC is getting exciting with Watchmen and Dark Knight, and now we're entering post-crisis. So I would like to, this is a lengthy video because there are a lot of comics to talk about. I'd like to thank you all for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed this. If you enjoyed this and you haven't seen the rest of the series, this goes all the way back to the early 1930s. There are more than 50 episodes to watch, and we still have at this point now 39 episodes to go, 40 episodes to go. Because our last year by the time we get into the 40 episodes from now, it will be chronologically 2026. So we'll be able to look back at the top submitted books from 2025. And then I do have a plan for a weekly series to follow that, but that's for the future. In the meantime, oh, by the way, I am retired. I've alluded to it in the past. I'm recording this on Friday. It was my last day of work. It feels very strange, but I'm looking forward to this new chapter, which is going to include a bunch of things, including comic books. In the meantime, if you like these videos, here are a couple of my other videos here, and this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.